Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second of our 3 nights of the Women's Prize for Fiction Virtual Shortlist Festival. We had an amazing evening yesterday getting going, and many of you are coming back and some of you will be here for the first time. You are very welcome. I can see that people are joining from all over the world. Please keep sending us your messages from where you are. The idea of doing the virtual festival was always so that a wider range of people could be involved, could be engaging with the Women's Prize, and could be here to celebrate the 2021 shortlist. For those of you who were last night, forgive me for repeating myself, but just to say the Women's Prize, we're now 26, which seems amazing, and the prize was set up to honour and to celebrate and to amplify women's voices and to promote a diverse and beautiful and magnificent range of novels written by women in English from all over the world to as wide a range of readers who'd possibly love them. We are now, in the last couple of years, a charity. All of you have bought your tickets to be here this evening, but if you fancy pressing the donate button, I'm sure that's appearing at the moment in the chat box, we'd be very grateful for your support. We have many projects that we like to run alongside the prize, because the idea of the Women's Prize has always been to reach out and to say to any woman, whoever she is, whatever age she is, whatever her background, whatever her race, whatever her interest, whatever genre she's writing in, that your voice matters. And one of the things that we can do as a charitable foundation is to try to promote engagement with new writing from all over the country. This year, we launched our new project called Discoveries, powered by NatWest and Curtis Brown Creative, the literary agency Curtis Brown. And we had thousands of entries, first-time writers, nobody been published before, sharing their work with us. And last week, we announced the very first Discoveries winner, Emma van Straten, who has already been taken on by a literary agent, and I hope to see her name on this screen in a couple of years' time. One of the other things, of course, I need to mention, some of you might have listened to the government's press announcement yesterday, and we have had to take the decision, the Women's Prize Trust has had to take the decision to postpone this year's announcement of the winner and the award ceremony and all of the events that were going to happen next month. But it's not all bad news, because although we would love to be together, we did feel that it was much more important that we could celebrate in person, that the readers and the writers and the sponsors and the publishers could all be in the same shared space. So the announcement will now happen on the 8th of September in London, in Bedford Square in September. And the day before that, all of the events that were going to happen, the live shortlist readings, the mistress class with me and a hidden writer now to be announced, and also a live recording of our podcast will all take place. So do go on our website, all of the information will be there. Like everybody, we're just kind of running to catch up at the moment, but everything will be on the website, all the information about if you want to make a donation, and about Discoveries, and about all of the other works, that the charitable works that the Women's Prize for Fiction Trust does. So those of you who were here yesterday know the drill. We have 2 of the extraordinary authors who were on this year's shortlist with us this evening, Claire Fuller and Yaa Gyasi. We have extraordinary readers. We have Zawe Ashton and Juliet Stevenson. And it's a particular pleasure to have Juliet Stevenson reading, because she came when the prize was a baby prize in the first year, and gave the award and made the speech. And it was extraordinary for us to have the support of someone like her. So it's wonderful that she's, for the first time, doing one of our shortlist readings. You can chat in the box, and the Women's Prize team is there, and they will be fielding and putting any information in the box about the actors and the readers and anything else that's mentioned. But also, we're going to be taking questions at the end. So do save your questions up, type them in the Q&A, and we'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. Right, that is all the housekeeping done. If we were in a live space, I'd have to give you information about the fire exits, but the joy of Zoom is that I don't have to do that. So we're going to start with the first reading this evening. Claire Fuller's Unsettled Ground is, well, it's the most beautiful novel. It's plangent, it's moving, it's extraordinary, and when you read it you realize that actually there are very few novels like this that combine this sort of sense of tension and this extraordinary sense of place, and very unusual protagonists, if you like, in the middle. But before I bring Claire onto the stage to talk about her novel, I'd like to introduce the wonderful Olivier award-winning brilliant actress Juliet Stevenson to read from Unsettled Ground. Over to you, Juliet.
The morning sky lightens, and snow falls on the cottage. It falls on the thatch, concealing the moss and the mouse damage, smoothing out the undulations, filling in the hollows and slips, melting where it touches the bricks of the chimney. It settles on the plants and the bare soil in the front garden and forms a perfect mound on top of the rotten gatepost, as though shaped from the inside of a teacup. It hides the roof of the chicken coop and those of the privy and the old dairy, leaving a dusting across the workbench and floor where the window was broken long ago. In the vegetable garden at the back, the snow slides through the rips in the plastic of the polytunnel, chills the onion sets 4 inches underground, and shrivels the new shoots of the Swiss chard. Only the head of the last winter cabbage refuses to succumb, the interior leaves curled green and strong, waiting. In the high double bed up the left staircase, Dot lies beside her adult daughter, Jeannie, who's gently snoring. Something different about the light in the room has woken Dot, and she can't get back to sleep. She gets out of the bed, floorboard's cold, air colder, and puts on her dressing gown and slippers. The dog, Jeannie's dog, a biscuit-coloured lurcher who sleeps on the landing with her back to the chimney breast, raises her head, inquiring about the early hour as Dot passes, lowering it when she gets no answer. Downstairs in the kitchen, Dot jabs at the embers in the range with a poker and shoves in a ball of paper, some kindling, and a log. She feels a pain behind her left eye, between her left eye and her temple. Does the place have a name? She needs to go to the optician, get her eyes checked. But then what? How will she pay for new glasses? She needs to take her prescription to the chemist, but she's worried about the cost. The light is wrong down here, too. Glowing. She touches her temple as though to locate the soreness and sees through the curtains in the gap where they don't quite meet that it is snowing. It is the 28th of April. Her movements must have roused the dog again, because now there's a scratching at the door at the bottom of the left staircase, and Dot reaches out to unlatch it. She watches her hand grasping the wrought iron, the liver spots and cross-hatching seeming peculiar, unlike anything she's seen before. The mechanics of her fingers, the way the skin on her knuckles stretches over bone, bending around the handle. The articulation is alien. The hand of an imposter. The effort of pushing on the tiny plate with her thumb seems impossible. A bodily weariness worse even than when her twins were 3 months old and didn't sleep at the same time, or the terrible year after they turned 12. But with great concentration, she depresses it and the latch lifts. The dog pokes her snout through, the rest of her body following. She whimpers and licks Dot's left hand where it hangs against her thigh, pushes nose into palm, making the hand swing of its own accord, a pendulum. The pain increases, and Dot worries that the dog might wake Jeannie with her whining. Jeannie asleep in the right-hand dip in the double mattress, first made by her husband Frank, long dead, and on the rare occasions when her children were out of the house, by that other unmentionable at-home man, who is too long for that old short bed, so he cannot stretch out. And then hollowed further by Jeannie, even though she's a wisp of a thing, and ate only a tiny slice of the Victoria sponge they made for when Dot herself turned 70 last month, and had the little celebration here in the kitchen with Bridget taking telephone pictures of Julius, on his fiddle and she on her banjo, and Jeannie on the guitar, all singing after a drop of port to lubricate the vocal cords, Juliet always says, and how the sensation Dot has now is similar to the way she felt following her third glass, clumsy and blurred, with her thoughts diffuse, dizzily leaving the remains of the cake on the table, so that dog, Naughty, stood on her hind legs and yumphed it down, and them scolding and laughing until her sides yurt, curt, all her loves but one there with her, and the dog barking and jumping and barking, too excited and noisy, like she'd be in the snow, waking Julius, who sleeps so lightly and stirs at any noise. All these thoughts, and more, which Dot is barely aware of, pass through her mind while her body slows. It is a wet coat she wants to shed, like the chickens with their autumn molt. An unresponsive weight, leaden.
What an amazing and powerful reading, and just sends shivers down my spine. Claire Fuller, welcome to the stage, welcome to the screen. It's so fantastic to have you here. It's the most extraordinary novel. But before I start to quiz you a little bit about it, could you just, for the benefit of the readers who haven't yet bought it, and I know that the Women's Prize are putting all details of buying the books in the chat as we speak, just tell us a little bit about the context of the novel and how you came to write it.
I will, but I also want to say that was amazing.
I know, wasn't it incredible? I mean, and it's Juliet Stevenson reading it. It's like, I know. I know. Good. This is what the Women's Prize delivers, hopefully.
Yes, so Unsettled Ground is about Jeannie and Julius, who are 51-year-old twins and still live with their mother in rural isolation and poverty in a cottage in Wiltshire. And as you've heard, the novel opens when their mother Dot dies of a stroke, and they discover her on the kitchen floor. And they've lived such an insular life, and Dot has dealt with all the money, and they haven't really got any technology, very little technology. They've had very little education, these twins. And after her death, they discover that she has left them with a lot of debt. And they also find that the cottage that they live in is not theirs for the rest of their lives as they believed. And eventually they are evicted, and things follow on from there.
And it's so, you're so skillful in the sense that when I first read, I felt a great deal of sympathy for Dot. But then as I read further and in a way their lives unraveled, and you talk about the twins as kind of being different, you don't specifically say what it is, but that they're different. I started to feel that the person Dot had maybe not been the best mother for them. So when you were writing, did you have Dot as your first character, or did you have the idea of twins as your first, your protagonist? Who came first to you? Who talked to you first?
Jeannie absolutely came first. So the female twin. But to understand her, I wanted to understand a little bit about her mother. So that's why Dot starts and the death kicks it off. But it was Jeannie absolutely who came to me first. And you're right, Dot is quite a complex character, and she's not even really on the page. So everybody, the readers and Jeannie and Julius, have to learn about her, discover things about her as the novel progresses. But I wanted to write a really good mother, but actually she turned out to be she loves her children to such an extent that she turns into a bad mother, really.
But what made you decide you needed a twin? Did you want to have that? Was Jeannie originally one character and then you felt you needed something outside? Was that in your first draft that they were twins, or was that something that you did in the editing? Because I've read that you love the editing process. I know you're a teacher as well, and obviously you study to a very high level creative writing, as well as obviously award-winning novelist. I should say you won the Desmond Elliott for your debut novel, and you've had the most novels of anybody on the shortlist published at 4. So you are the queen here. But I wondered whether Julius was part of your original draft, or whether he came in to give a certain perspective that you felt you needed?
No, he was very much there from the beginning. So because Jeannie is the main character, she came first, but Julius followed very soon after. And really, they could have been just very close in age. You know, the book is not about identity particularly, so it's not really, they didn't have to be twins, but they had to be very close because they live in this place together. They are really the only people they know. And twins, for me, because they live 51 years in such an insulated, inward-looking way, that the twin kind of idea worked because, you know, they can finish each other's sentences, they understand what each other is thinking. And then when Dot dies, when they're 51, suddenly that bond is broken. And so the twins idea helped with that, because having been so close for so long, and then suddenly they discover that they want different things.
One of the things that, you know, I know you're in Hampshire and I'm not that far away in Sussex. I mean, many of the people are saying, when, you know, they come from Atlanta and Wales and New York and Australia, you know, we've got people from all over, but you and I are only about 50 miles apart, I imagine. And at the heart of this, there is a really very untold story, that of rural poverty, about the places that look very affluent from the outside, but the people who belong to that land actually don't own it. They're in tithed cottages, they can't continue to live there, they can't afford to live there. So was that something that you'd always had in the back of your mind you'd like to write about as a theme? Or was the character, did Jeannie just say, this is the person I am and this is where I lived, and you started her?
Yeah, I mean the latter really, because I don't think about themes before I start to write.
Right, okay.
Yeah, not at all. And in fact, I don't have a plan. I don't know where the novel's going. I just start with a character in a place and let them go off. And it's kind of like I'm following behind and writing the story. But really what started this novel off, Jeannie ends up, or in the middle of the book, has to go and live in a caravan in the woods, a very dilapidated caravan. And that's what started the novel, because I discovered one of these caravans in the woods, and I knew that I needed to get her there, but I had no idea how or who she was or what would happen to her. So rural poverty was not something that I knew much about. And I've since discovered that very few people really do. And it's just, the conversation is about urban poverty. And so once I found out that it isn't really discussed, then it became very interesting to me. And I did lots of research and tried to find out about the issues that people who live in the way that Jeannie is forced to live have to face.
It really struck a chord with me. But I'm a carer, and I care for my mother-in-law who's 90. And when I was writing my latest book about it, she was telling me of all of her grandparents worked on the land, and her parents before her, and that when they could no longer work, they had nowhere to live, and that she had two grandparents who were shunted between each of the four children, and they slept in chairs in the kitchen. You know, they had nowhere to live, and this is in living memory as well. So I think it's wonderful that you put this on the page. A final question. I love the idea that you have no plan, and that you kind of let it sing. How much then is this beautiful finished copy that we have here? How close to that is your first draft? You know, how much refashioning and changing do you do once you've got the first draft out?
It's very close, actually. The whole story is there, the characters are there, the mysteries and the lies and the plot is there, and the ending is there. But in my revision, which is the bit I like doing, I hate writing, actually. I really don't enjoy it. So I really write just in order to have something to edit. Yes. And that's where perhaps the depth comes, you know, the depth of the characters that I'm looking for, and the foreshadowing, and perhaps some of the description. Things do change a bit. So, you know, the ending was made more positive in those revisions. I think two minor characters were made into one character, but nothing too major, really.
God, that is so impressive that it kind of came out like that. It's absolutely wonderful. Don't go away, stay on the stage, as it were, and we'll come back to talk a bit more in a little moment. So the second novel that we have this evening is Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi. This is an absolutely beautiful novel. It's ambitious. It tells a story of not displacement, but Ghana, Alabama, what it means to live in a country where your heart maybe isn't entirely there. It's also a story of siblings, but at the heart of it, there's this sense of science and the possibility of science and understanding through science. And it's ambitious and it's absolutely glorious. And to hear a little bit from Transcendent Kingdom, we have the stage and television actor, also just about to join Marvel franchise in 2022, Zawe Ashton. Over to you, Zoe.
Toward the middle of my first year at graduate school, Raymond and I started seeing each other more seriously. I couldn't get enough of him. He smelled like vetiver and musk and the jojoba oil he put in his hair. Hours after I left him, I would find those traces of those scents on my fingers, my neck, my breasts, all those places where we had brushed up against each other, touched. After our first night in bed together, I learned that Raymond's father was a preacher at an African Methodist Episcopal church in Philadelphia, and I'd laughed. So that's why I like you, I said. You're the son of a preacher man. You like me, huh? He said with that deep voice, that sly grin, as he moved toward me so that we could begin again. It was my first real relationship, and I was so smitten that I felt like I was a living lily of the valley, a rose of Sharon. Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. My friend Bethany and I used to read passages from Song of Solomon to each other, crouched beneath the pale blue pews in the empty sanctuary of the first assemblies of God. It felt illicit to read about all of that flesh, breasts like fawns, necks like ivory towers, in the pages of this holy book. It was an incongruous thrill to feel that flush of desire well up between my legs as Bethany and I giggled through those verses. Where is all of this pleasure coming from? I think, my voice getting huskier and huskier with each chapter. Raymond was the closest I'd come to recapturing that feeling, the pleasure as well as the sense of forbiddenness. The fact that he wanted to be with me at all made me feel like I was getting away with some con. He lived on campus in an Escondido village low-rise, and pretty soon I was spending most of my time there. He liked to cook these sumptuous meals, 5-hour braises with homemade bread and salads of shaved radishes and fennel. He'd invite all of his colleagues from modern thought and literature, and they would have intense, detailed conversations about things I had never heard of. I'd nod and smile at the mentions of the use of allegory in Ben Okri's Stars of the New Curfew, or generational trauma among diasporic communities. Afterward, I would wash the dishes the way my mother taught me, turning off the water as I soaked down the pots and pans, trying to get rid of the elaborate mess Raymond's cooking always left behind. "You're so quiet," he said, coming up behind me to wrap his arms around my waist to kiss my neck. "I haven't read any of the books y'all are talking about." He turned me around to face him, grinned. I almost never let a y'all slip from my lips, and when I did, Raymond seemed to savor it like a drop of honey on his tongue. That word used sparingly, thoughtlessly, was the only remaining evidence of my Alabama years. I'd spent a decade carefully burying everything else. "Talk about your own work, then. Let us know how the mice are doing." I just want them to get to know you a little better. I want everyone to see what I see, he said. What did he see? I wondered. I'd usually bat him away so that I could finish washing the dishes. That year was the beginning of my final thesis experiment. I put the mice in a behavioral testing chamber, a clear-walled structure with a lever and a metal tube. I trained the mice to seek reward. When they pressed the lever, ensure would flood into the tube. Pretty soon they were pressing the lever as often as possible, drinking up their reward with abandon. Once they'd gotten a hang of this, I changed the conditions. When the mice pressed the lever, sometimes they got ensure, but sometimes they got a mild foot shock instead. The foot shock was randomized, so there was no pattern for them to figure out. The mice just had to decide if they wanted to keep pressing the lever, keep risking that shock in the pursuit of pleasure. Some of the mice stopped pressing the lever right away. After a shock or two, they did the mouse equivalent of throwing up their hands and never went near the lever again. Some of the mice stopped, but it took time. They liked the ensure enough to keep holding out hope that the shocks would stop. Then there was the final group of mice, the ones who never stopped. Day after day, shock after shock, they pressed the lever.
Yeah, welcome. That was that was an amazing reading to hear. Zoe, read that. I don't know whether you felt that. Did that send tingle down your spine as well, listening to that?
Oh, absolutely. That was fantastic. I'm really glad I got to hear that, and Claire's reading as well. That was beautiful too.
Well, it's the most wonderful novel, And what I loved is that you have this extraordinary sweep of continents and culture clash, I suppose, but also this heart of science in it, which I thought was a wonderful counterpoint. So could you just say a little bit, before I fire too many questions at you, your inspirations behind Transcendent Kingdom and where the first idea came from?
Sure, I'd love to. So my own best friend, her name is Tina Kim. She's a neuroscientist, and around the time that I was finishing up my first novel, Homegoing, she was finishing up her PhD in neuroscience. And at that time, I knew, I had a vague idea of what she did. She had always explained her work to me as being about addiction and depression, but I didn't really know the mechanics of it. I didn't know it too deeply. I remember asking her to read a paper that she had written and sitting down, trying to read this paper and realizing that I couldn't understand a word of it, which was odd for me because, you know, we'd kind of grown up in parallel and she still spoke my language, but I somehow couldn't speak hers anymore. So I just kind of asked if I could go shadow her in her lab. At that point, I was just curious to see what she did all day. And I went, and that experiment that Zoe read from is actually her thesis experiment. So I got to see her perform some of that, got to hear her talk about it. And I thought, oh, maybe there's a novel here. So when it came time for me to sit down and write the second novel, that's what I was thinking about, how to kind of weave that work, that science, into a story that grappled with science.
Oh, that makes sense, because the science is, it's so compelling to read, and you're Gifty as a character, you know, you're on her side all the time, even though she's experimenting on mice and, you know, all of these things. But in terms of, once you've got this framework and that you knew you wanted to write about science and use that, you know, to talk about displacement and mother-daughter relationship and all of these things, did you always have the idea that Gifty would have something particular that she wanted to discover about addiction because of her own family history? Was that, you know, did that come in quite quickly, that part of the story?
It did, yes. That came in very early on. I knew that I wanted, you know, the research, which to use the kind of scientific terms, the research that she does is on reward-seeking behavior. And so you can think of it as existing on a spectrum. Some mice seek reward even though they know that there is risk involved. Some mice stop seeking the reward even though they know that reward can be had from it, as addiction and depression on that spectrum. And I wanted those two things to affect her on a personal level. So as we read, we start to see that Gifty herself comes from a family that has gone through great chaos, in part thanks to her brother's opioid addiction.
And were you conscious of that being such an enormous subject in America in particular? You know, sort of big pharma, the prescription drugs, all of the conversations that happen in America around these things. Was that also in your mind, that you wanted to have that storyline underlying it?
I was, absolutely. I, like so many other people, was reading a great deal about the opioid crisis in America. It was being, at the time that I was writing, it was being reported on near daily.
Yes.
And I found the reportage to be really moving, very humanizing, and willing to kind of look at the effects of the crisis, not just on the opioid use disorder sufferer, but also the families. So there were things like pieces on grandparents who are now having to raise their grandchildren because their children could not raise them, or first responders who were training to revive people who had gone through overdoses, and I found it again so beautiful and touching. And also, I think it was the first time that we were really seeing an interrogation of the pharmaceutical companies' roles in creating this problem, and so I found it really, really inspiring and moving, and I wanted to add my voice to the chorus of people talking about this issue, but to do so from the perspective of a Black family.
Yes, and also I should make it absolutely clear for those of you who haven't yet read it, this is an absolutely gripping, beautiful novel driven by characters and story. That the science is there and it's wonderful, but at the heart of it, it is a family story. And of course, you did this so beautifully in Home Going, putting Ghana on the page and America on the page, and the conflict between the two. But I loved the relationship, the complicated relationship between Gifty and her mother. Now, did you always have a sense of how the family was going to be split into the women and the men? And when you started to write, did you know that kind of thing, that the mother-daughter relationship was going to be very fundamental, as well as the brother-sister relationship?
Yeah, for me, the mother-daughter relationship was always central. I love books about mother-daughter relationships, and books and movies, anything. I read a lot of these stories, and I find it really compelling to think about this point where you, as the daughter, find yourself kind of fitting into this mold that your mother may have left for you, and also this point in a young person's relationship with her parents, where she finds herself having to take care of them, as so many of us will eventually do if our parents live long enough. And so here is this kind of hinge point in Gifty's relationship with her mother. Her mother's sick, she needs to care for her, and yet there's this whole history behind them, this whole trauma behind them that makes it hard for them to communicate with one another. So how do you care for someone with whom you've kind of lost that ability to communicate?
Yeah, it's absolutely beautifully done. A final question before I bring Claire back in. Claire was wonderfully open about saying she doesn't plan. She's got an idea and off she goes. How about you? How do you work in terms of your first idea, the edits, ending up with the book? Does this book look like the book you thought you were writing, or did it take its own momentum from the writing process? Tell us a bit about that.
It's so encouraging to me to hear a writer like Claire say that she doesn't plan either, because it makes me feel more encouraged in my own work. I don't plan, and I have found that the more I try to plan, the more I think that I have a handle on the book, the more it gets away from me. So it's just never been useful for me to do any kind of outlining ahead of time. And so I really am just kind of trying to find the story as it comes, trying to listen to the story as it comes. Transcendent Kingdom does look a lot like it did in the first draft. It didn't change too dramatically. I think the revisions were more about getting the structure tighter because it is a novel that's nonlinear. And so figuring out how to keep that momentum going was what I was spending most of the revision on. But as far as the story, it's pretty much the same as it was from first draft to last draft.
And well, that's extraordinary as well. I mean, I'm like you two, I don't plan, but the difference between my first draft and my final draft is quite significant, because I often don't know what book I'm really writing till I've got a first draft. And then I go, oh, that's interesting. So that doesn't work now. And neither did, so then I'm piling it in. So it's slightly different. Question that was asked last night, it was both of the authors last night, Britt Bennett and Susanna Clarke, they were second novels. Yours is a second novel. Homegoing was extremely successful as well. And it was, a National Book Critics Circle Award for Best First Novel. You were shortlisted for many things. The BBC chose you as, one of the 100 novels changing our world. These are fabulous things, but also big pressures. So I wondered, were you able to put all of those things aside when you suddenly thought, yes, I'm going to write something inspired by my friend's thesis? Or did you have that kind of, it's the second novel, what are people expecting, what am I going to give them?
Yeah, it was hard, I have to say,
to
put aside the all of the acclaim, which was wonderful, of course, but it does create a certain amount of noise. You go into a first novel with this sense of complete freedom, and the idea that perhaps no one will even read it, so why not try to do whatever you'd like? You can't really say that for a second novel if you've had the kind of success that I had with my first. I knew that there would be people who wanted to pick up the book, and so suddenly audience comes in a way that it hadn't with the first. And so it took me a little bit to try to figure out how to return to the quiet place that I needed in order to write. And once I found that place, I think the process happened much more smoothly, but it was about kind of releasing myself from the pressure of feeling like I needed to do exactly what I had done the first time around, and just to recognize that, this was about me facing the blank page every day, as it always is.
I think that's fantastic you were able to do that, because it's a wonderful novel. Claire, could we bring you back onto the stage? If you, brilliant, hi, you're still there. You also have had enormous success. This is your fourth novel, but you have had success and you've been shortlisted for awards and won awards. So you have that framework as well. Did you enjoy writing Unsettled Ground? Because that is I think we all as novelists enjoy writing some books more than others. And I got the sense you really did enjoy it, but I thought I'd ask. You can.
Well, apart from my issue with not really liking writing the first draft, the story unfolding was really interesting for me. And Jeannie was a very difficult character to write, because she's semi-literate, and writing someone like that was really kind of illuminating, considering that writing and reading is so fundamental to me and what all three of us do. So I don't know about enjoyable, but I discovered lots of things, and that was fun. I kind of enjoyed that element of it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're getting loads of questions, so I'm going to just bang through them and see if we can give everybody what they want. So the very first question, I'm delighted to say, comes from 8-year-old Florence, who is watching with her mother or father. So hello, Florence, if you could see us all. And she would like to know from both of you, what made you first start writing? Yeah.
Oh, that's so sweet. Hi, Florence. Thank you. Thank you for your question. I loved reading so much when I was a child that I couldn't imagine living a life that didn't involve books in some way. And I know lots of people who love reading don't go on to be writers, but for me, very early on, reading and writing went hand in hand. I wanted to see if I could do the thing that I enjoyed experiencing so much. I was an avid Reading Rainbow watcher, the television show. And the first short story I ever wrote, I wrote when I was about your age, Florence, for the Reading Rainbow Young Writers and Illustrators competition. And I didn't win, but LeVar Burton did sign a certificate and send it back. And so that was my first brush with fame.
Brilliant. And what about you, Claire? Because you also are a teacher and a mentor for other people, so you see it from both sides.
Yeah, but I didn't start writing till I was 40, so that was
Brilliant.
14 years ago. So started so much later than Yaa. But still a great question from Florence. And I have always been a reader, but it just never occurred to me that I could be a writer. I thought that writers were different from me. They were really special and unique. And I'm not saying that you're not special and unique, but it just it never occurred to me. And until I was 40 and I started writing some short stories also for a competition, and didn't win for a couple of years, but carried on going and then wrote my first novel. So I think, you can start at 8, you can start at 48 or later. I think reading is really important. I absolutely wouldn't be a writer if I hadn't been a reader first. Just to consume all those other books was really important.
And and of course that is part of the point of the Discoveries program, that a lot of people doesn't occur to them that their story could be put down. And so I'm afraid, Florence, you're too young to enter, but anybody over the age of 18 can, and we'll be calling for entries for next year's, the 2022 Discoveries in September. So any of you who are inspired, do go onto the website for that. The next question from Daisy leads very nicely on from what you've just said, Claire, and what you said, Yaa, that she'd like to know which authors or books in particular inspired you both. Which would you recommend to people? Claire, do you want to start on that?
When I'm writing any novel, I try to find novels that cover the same kind of ground and read those while I'm writing. But with Unsettled Ground, I really struggled to find any fiction that was about rural poverty set in England. Lots and lots in America. It's a big subject in America, but not over here. But so I didn't find any that really inspired Unsettled Ground, but there are still enormous numbers of authors that I read and absolutely love and perhaps inspire my writing more generally. So people like Shirley Jackson, and her kind of quite dark fiction. Barbara Cummins, an English author, wrote very kind of odd, quirky books. And then more contemporary, I read a lot of contemporary fiction as well. People like Elizabeth Strout, anything Elizabeth Strout writes, I will read. David Vann, I love his work too. So, but the list is endless.
Brilliant, but we'll put some of them in the chat for people. What about you, Yaa? Are there particular people you admire and are inspiring for you?
Yes, I love that Claire just mentioned Elizabeth Strout. My Name is Lucy Barton is one of the books that I was reading a lot to think about, going back to an earlier question, to think about mother-daughter relationships. I think that book is excellent on the subject. I also love Marilyn Robinson and reread Gilead as I was working on Transcendent Kingdom. James Baldwin is hugely important to me. Go Tell It on the Mountain. Yeah. His first novel was deeply impactful for thinking about religion in the South as I wrote Transcendent Kingdom. But I have so many heroes that I could go on about writers I love for the entire program.
Sorry, we're just sharing a few, but that's the reading list is getting longer and longer. But as we go through, but I think it's so fascinating, because both of these novels are such beautiful novels, and they are very distinctive novels. And so I think for readers to know what books also inspire you both is really helpful, to go along with all of that. So we've got a question from Lara, which is a lovely question. Claire and Yaa as well, did you know when you were writing your novels that you were writing something special? I love that. I think that's a great question, because it's hard when you're writing, but every now and again you think, oh, no, did you feel that, Claire? Because as you say, there is very little of this set in England? You know, did you know that you were really writing something pretty unusual?
I think I knew that it was an unusual subject, but I had, for me, it's really weird talking about all 4 novels, and it's a bit like picking your favorite. It's like picking your favorite child, you know, and it's, I can't tell you how delighted I am that Unsettled Ground has been shortlisted for this prize. But then I think about, oh, poor old Bitter Orange, or poor old Doing Lessons, you know. So, and then when I'm writing them, I don't ever think about what might happen when it will be published. You know, I don't project that far. It's, can I finish the thing? You know, So I'm not really thinking this is special. Sometimes I might write a paragraph that I think, yeah, I got it, but never the whole book. It doesn't work like that for me.
I always like my favourite novel is the one I'm not writing, the one I wish I was writing next. Willow asks, Gifty's mother's relationship with language and the way her personality changes when she's speaking Twi, Fante or English is written so beautifully. Is this drawn from your own real life experience?
It is somewhat. I was thinking about the fact that that our personalities do change a little bit in keeping with what language we speak, in part because the language itself dictates what we can say or how we can think about something. My own mother speaks those 3 languages, Fanti, Twi, and English. My father's a French professor and he speaks 3 languages. I grew up with people who were accustomed to kind of switching registers. And when you grow up around that, you do see the kind of subtle personality shifts that happen in each different language as they have access to things that they can express because the language gives them the ability to express it. I find that really, really fascinating. I loved the movie Arrival that came out a few years ago. I think it does that. It plays with that really, really interestingly as well. So I think a lot about language and linguistics.
Brilliant, thank you. Claire, from Barbara, she says, Jeannie turns out to be stronger than expected. Was that always the case, or did her character evolve to become the stronger twin?
Oh, it definitely evolved because yeah, I had no idea what would happen at the end of the book till I got there. But you know, I am aware when I write that I want to create some kind of change in the character. So if she starts out, you know, weak and very worried about accepting help from anybody, you know, I want to show that she changes by the end of the book. And there's also a kind of crossover between what happens with her twin and what she goes through. So, you know, she wants to go back home, and she gets back home, but kind of what risk, you know, what reason takes her back there is not as expected. So I didn't know exactly what the change would be till I got there, but I knew that there would have to be some change in her life.
Sophie asked, and I'm not going to read the whole question because I don't want to give things away, but she says her heart broke for Nana, and did you always know what was going to happen to him? I can't really read the rest of the question without really giving things away.
I did always know what would happen to him, and my heart broke too. I loved that relationship between Nana and Gifty. I have 2 brothers myself, so I loved thinking about those sibling relationships, and his story is heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it is absolutely heartbreaking. A question for both of you about titles. They're both wonderful titles, and every bookseller will tell you that it's a magic thing, that sometimes you can't say why some titles work and people can remember them, and then others, you know, the poor booksellers have people going and saying, have you got that book with the green cover? Because nobody can remember the. So there's a question here for both of you about the choice of titles. So I wonder, could you both just say, do titles come easily to you? You know, do you know what your book is called, or is it one of those things that you have to kind of dig out in the writing? Claire?
For me, usually they come while I'm writing, but often then they get changed for various reasons. So Unsettled Ground was called Just Like Your Mother for the whole time that I was working on it. And for me, it seemed exactly right for what goes on. And I didn't really question it. And it was bought by Penguin in the UK and by my American publishers, Tin House. And they said, Just Like Your Mother doesn't really work for us in the US.
Yeah.
But it was really important to me to have the same title across all English speaking, English reading territories, just because of social media and publicity and all that kind of stuff. So I came up with a couple of other titles, and they didn't work for various reasons either. And it got to quite close to having to design the cover, and I was, what am I going to do? So I wrote down lots and lots of words from the book on little pieces of paper. I cut them up into individual words, and I laid them all out on my desk, and I shuffled them. And it was a very physical job, and to see which words worked with each other, and Unsettled and Ground came up to each other, and I thought, that's it. And then everybody was happy.
Well, I'm not surprised, because it is it is incredibly accurate about what the book is about. You know, the fact that these the twins, you know, they belong to the land, but it's not their land. I mean, it's fantastic.
Works on all sorts of levels. Yes.
That is brilliant. When there's a movie made about your life writing this book, that's going to be a fantastic scene. Brilliant scene, Claire. Yeah, the Transcendent Kingdom. Again, it's a really great title and a really memorable title. So, was that always on, you know, day one, page one, when you typed your name at the top of the page?
Claire, that's such a great story. I'm going to have to steal that method at some point. Well, I had started with the title Transcendent Kingdom, but I didn't think it was going to stick. I kept writing, thinking that it would be something else. In fact, I had to give a reading from it. And they asked me for the title, and I wouldn't say because I didn't think it was going to be the title. I'd had this experience with homegoing. Homegoing was called something else. It was called African America for, you know, the whole 7 years that I worked on it. And then I changed it before it was published to Homegoing. So I just assumed the same thing would happen to Transcendent Kingdom, and I kept waiting for something I liked better to come up, and nothing did. And so I thought, okay, maybe this is proof that that was the title all along.
You know, I think books do sometimes know, you know, and I think in the same way that characters, don't they? Sometimes the character's name, you write all the way through a novel and you know that the name isn't quite right, and then suddenly you think, oh yeah, I need a new name, and then it all falls into place. A great question from Laura, saying, have your writing practices changed during the pandemic? You know, did you find it easier to write, harder to write, or could you forget all of these things? Have you been writing? Because of course you're both very early in publication, so you might be resting for a bit. What about, are you resting, Claire?
No, I don't.
No resting.
No resting. I don't really rest. I usually start the next novel as soon as the last one, the next one is off my hands, and my aim is
before publication, so before the book's out in the world, right?
Oh yes, long before. So I try, my plan is always to finish the first draft of the next novel before the previous one is published.
I am so impressed.
But only because the publishing process is very, very slow, much, a year and a half or something. I haven't quite managed it this time, so I'm, I don't know, 2/3 of the way through the next novel. And it hasn't changed for me particularly because I'm at home writing as I ever was. My husband is now working from home, and that is slightly different in that, he says, calling upstairs, is it lunchtime yet? And then I, oh, well, lunch, yes, of course. So things like that have changed. I'm probably eating too much, but other than that, not much has changed.
And how about you, Yaa? I know you were saying that you've been in New York all the way through the pandemic and the lockdown, and how was that atmosphere, and how was that for your creative working?
It wasn't great for my creative working. No, I'm unlike Claire. I don't usually have something that I've already started after I finish the previous book. And I find beginnings really hard. So I'm always kind of trying to figure out what the story wants to be, what it is. I have so many false starts, 20 pages, 30 pages, 40 pages that I just throw out and start over. And having that kind of like frenetic process was not helpful in an anxious time. The two feelings just weren't compatible. And so I think I decided to just kind of give myself a break and allow this to be a fallow period, and recognize that that when the story emerged, I would be there for it, but tried not to force it. So it took me a while to get started on this new thing, but I have finally.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And could you both read? Because I've interviewed quite a lot of people who found both writing and reading, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, quite difficult. It was as if there was too much in our heads already to dive into an imaginary world. What about you both? Do you manage to read when you're writing as well?
I went back and forth. There were months where I was reading a ton, and then months where all I could read were the headlines over and over. And so I think the books offered a reprieve from that kind of that feeling of anxiety from reading the news constantly. So it was nice. It always felt good to be in a long novel, but it wasn't consistent. I wasn't always reading.
Yeah. Claire.
Yeah, I guess, when the pandemic first started, both writing and reading stopped for 2-3 weeks, a month.
Yeah.
Because you were just, I think everybody was the same, just taking in the headlines, thinking, what is this new world? What is going to happen? But eventually, I had to kind of, it felt like I just had to get on with normal life, because I can't change anything. So I'm going to kind of carry on. And I read an awful lot, and I carried on reading, and I read while I'm writing, and I don't. In fact, sometimes I will read deliberately while I'm writing, because it will help, help the tone, help refresh. If I read something that I absolutely love, sometimes I find that it makes me try harder, because I aspire to write like the novel I'm reading. And if I read something that doesn't particularly work, then I kind of learn from that as well, I think.
Oh, that's great. It just plummets me into despair. So that's a completely different approach. I've got one last specific question for both of you. We'll just see if we can get them done, because they're such great questions. Claire from Vanni says, the book is full of natural beauty, but also full of decay. Was it a deliberate intention to strip out the romantic notion of the English countryside, which tends to be held by the middle classes who are coming down from London? I've added that last bit. There wasn't any question.
Very, very deliberate, because we can all drive through those beautiful villages and see those lovely thatched cottages, and don't they look lovely? And that kind of rural idyll, or escaping to the countryside. And for people who live there and are kind of scraping a living, it's very different. Jeannie and Julius have an outside loo, and the roof leaks. They live in a lovely thatched cottage, but the reality is not like that for them. So I wanted. It's really important to me to write about the natural world in my novels, but I wanted to give it a slightly different slant. It was very deliberate.
And from Lucille said, how did you come up with the character of Miss Cindy and the religious abstinence group?
Unfortunately, I had a very similar experience to that scene where when I was a teenager, I ended up going to one of these classes with my church. And clearly that experience stuck with me, and I thought, I've got to put it in somewhere. So it ended up
get your own back. Yeah. After all this time. There are more questions, and I'm really sorry that we've run out of time, but thank you all so much for your questions. They're fantastic and detailed questions, and it's always interesting, because you can see that some people have obviously read the novels and love them with great detail, and others have still got that joy to come. You've both been so open and so warm, and we really appreciate you joining us. I really, really hope in September, on September the 8th, we all might be in a shared space for the announcement of the winner of the 2021 Women's Prize for Fiction. But whatever, we will make it work, however it falls out. For those of you asking, yes, the announcement will be on the 8th, and the 7th is the various events that are happening the day before. But as the Women's Prize team say, it's all on our website, so do go there. It's really sad that we are nearly finished for this festival. You know, we had an amazing day yesterday. This has been a fantastic session, and tomorrow we've got the last two books. Sherry Jones and Patricia Lockwood are going to be here, and there's going to be readings from their novels as well. As I said, we really appreciate everybody's support. You've all been very supportive, particularly about the fact that we've had to move everything around. And I'm just going to say it one more time because there's confusion. The 7th of July was the award ceremony. It's now the 8th of September is the award ceremony and the announcement. Okay, so that's it. It's that the dates are all very similar. So that's all. I'd like to say a big and final thank you to our sponsors, NatWest and Bailey's, to everybody behind the scenes at the Women's Prize team who make these events a joy, I hope, for our guests and for all of you at home. Please do come back, join us tomorrow evening. There's a question I keep being asked about my lipstick, and I promise I'll answer it tomorrow evening. But for now, all have a wonderful night. Enjoy the books, whatever you're reading, share it, pass it on. And everything about the Women's Prize is what we've done this evening, which is to celebrate amazing writing by amazing women. So Yaa Gyasi, Claire Fuller, thank you so much, and see all of you tomorrow night. Good night.